You know, if there's like a movie that someone has rescued from a dumpster somewhere, like found sitting on like a dusty shelf in another country somewhere, I am immediately curious. I don't care what the movie is. I don't care who made it. I am like immediately like hooked by this idea of, oh, there's this forgotten movie.
And then the movie that was rediscovered has not only been rediscovered, it's been restored to its original cut. And it's a movie that stars Paul Walker, Denise Richards, and a murderous robotic T-Rex. You pretty much have a movie that we at GenreVision have to check out. Greetings, loyal listeners and new recruits. I'm Drew Deitch.
I'm Travis Newton.
And this is GenreVision. GenreVision is a weekly movie club where we discuss horror films, action movies, fantasy flicks, sci-fi cinema, and more. And we are concluding March Madness, an entire month devoted to mad scientists, with a little cult film called Tammy and the T-Rex. And normally I wouldn't start the discussion with this, but I think it is crucial context to this movie, is that the version that we watched of Tammy and the T-Rex is colloquially known as the Gore cut, because the movie was originally made and had a bunch of gore scenes in it, and the producer of the movie, upon seeing all this, ended up hacking all of that out and trying to trim it down and turn this into a PG-13, ostensibly family comedy, which caused it to pretty much die on the vine. It was pretty much a forgotten movie for the most part.
Right. Never given the opportunity to become a cult film, because the cut of it that was released in the US was just unremarkable, and it was totally forgotten, despite it being like full of recognizable people. And having a really strange premise, it, you know, vanished into obscurity. But a couple years ago, they were able to pull together the removed scenes from its initial American release from other sources, from international releases.
Well, there was specifically one print of the original version that was even known to be in existence that had these original. It was the original cut of the movie, and that was what they were able to use for restoration.
For some reason, the credits on that version read Tanny and the Teenage T-Rex. That's not Tammy, it's Tanny for some odd reason.
I actually researched more of this movie than we normally do, because I was so this is a deep fascination for me, this kind of a revival, and considering the nature of it, with the fact that it's like there was all this gore and very explicit over the top gore.
Oh yeah.
That was cut out.
Lots of blood and guts. Absolutely.
So it turns out that, again, the producer, whose name I don't remember, that pretty much he is the one that presented this as, I want to make a movie because I have this big animatronic T-Rex. This is such like a window into why movies get made.
Yeah.
Is a producer got in contact with the eventual director and co-writer, Stuart Raffle, who we're going to talk about, and said, I have this animatronic T-Rex, but I have it for a very limited amount of time before it has to get shipped away, and I want to make a movie with it. And Stuart Raffle then had to very quickly come up with a movie in a short amount of time about a robotic T-Rex. And what he came up with was Tammy and the T-Rex. And the reason it's called Tammy and the T-Rex is when it was taken away from Raffle and recut by the producer, he did all of that in South America, and the lab that he used to process the print of the movie apparently just heard Tammy as Tanny and put that in for the credits.
Okay.
Because what's interesting is in the eventual PG-13 cut, I believe there is a completely redone title thing that has the correct title in it.
Sure.
This story, like you said, wacky premise, so wacky. The idea being that Denise Richards and Paul Walker, yes, Denise Richards from Starship Troopers and Paul Walker, most known for the Fast and Furious movies.
I love that you chose Starship Troopers for Denise Richards, who is at this point Denise Richards of Denise Richards fame and not Denise Richards of Starship Troopers fame. But go on.
I mean, she's always going to be Carmen in my eyes.
Well, yes, of course. Yes.
There's nobody else. Like, if you're going to be like, oh, Denise Richards, like people are like, oh, she was in a James Bond movie. I'm like, no. She
played Christmas Jones in that one Bond movie.
Wild Things. I'm like, listen, you're wrong. She is Carmen in Starship Troopers.
And then there's Paul Walker, who plays her teenage sweetheart in this movie. They're just regular old California high school students who are in the early stages of their relationship. Evidently, Denise Richards' character has this awful biker gang leader ex-boyfriend who is constantly trying to not necessarily win her back, but like just trying to like decimate any other male presence that wants her because, let's face it, he's an asshole.
He sucks. This leads to a confrontation between Paul Walker and the boyfriend, whose character's name is Billy, played by George Pilgrim, in which they have what is called by the local cops that break it up, one of whom is played by the always welcome Buck Flower. They call it a testicular standoff, in which they are both grabbing each other's groins and twisting. But Paul Walker is not being affected by this. And the cop, one of the other cops says, like, what's the matter, boy? You ain't got no nuts? And he's like, I'm wearing a cup. And immediately I loved him.
When you're watching this movie, if you don't have any awareness of like the production of it, it's like, I think this movie is kind of making itself up on the spot. Like at one point I was like, oh, this is kind of like that Justin Roiland thing where it's just improvised. It's the two brothers, the Mexican Armada. You know, it just kind of feels like it rolls with whatever the fuck it wants to do in any given moment because fuck it, why not? Well, it turns out that was kind of the case because it was conceived very, very quickly on a whim, almost as a gag by director Stuart Raffle, who you may recognize as the guy behind The Ice Pirates and Mac and Me.
Mac and Me. And I actually looked up Stuart Raffle because when we looked into this, and I was like, oh, he did Mac and Me. And I was like, oh, he did The Ice Pirates, which is a movie I think we will get on this show at some point.
Probably.
And a number of other movies. Turns out he is a fascinating character who grew up basically on a movie animal farm where it was that the place that he grew up and learned about filmmaking and stuff and that he worked when he was young was this Hollywood animals farm.
That explains so much because after the conflict continues, one of the places they go to is like, oh, suddenly there's just a lion and like a leopard.
Because eventually what happens is the gang bust into Denise Richards' home while Paul Walker is upstairs, unknown to Denise Richards, Tammy's parents, and they're about to get it on. And the gang busts in and then drags him out and is going to take him to some place. And we see them drive through, and there's a big sign that says some wildlife whatever thing. And it's like, oh, okay, this is weird and different. So they beat him up. They drive him out into the middle of this zoo, and they make him think that they're letting him go. He's like, you got to apologize to me, and the next time I'm going to kill you. And they're driving away. Sean Whalen, who a lot of people, you will recognize Sean Whalen. One of the most popular things he might be known for is the Michael Bay Got Milk commercial where he is trying to phone in with the answer Aaron Burr.
Yeah, it's like a radio answer, but he's got his mouth full of a peanut butter sandwich, and he's like, Burr.
He did a lot of commercials in the 90s.
He's highly, highly recognizable, Sean Whalen. You'll see him in a whole bunch of movies. Recently, I saw him in American Pickle, the Seth Rogen movie. Anyway, so long story short here, Paul Walker gets mauled by a lion.
That does happen. And then a game warden has to show up and just shotgun the lion to death off screen. And then Paul Walker is in the hospital, seemingly in a comatose state. And that's when the other plot starts to weave its way in, because earlier we meet Terry Kaiser, our mad scientist, who is apparently developing a robot T-Rex that he is going to then put a human brain into it. Eventually he comes around to like, well, the whole real idea is that I'm interested in, consciousness transference through technology kind of thing. But the way that he starts that off is through a giant robotic T-Rex, because that's what the producer had a thing that he wanted to make a movie around.
Yeah, Terry Kaiser, the guy who plays the mad scientist, you'll recognize him as Bernie from Weekend at Bernie's. He played the titular dead dude in Weekend at Bernie's movies,
as well as the evil psychiatrist from Friday the 13th Part 7, The New Blood, which is very important because when we started watching this, Travis, you immediately was like, this gives off strong Friday the 13th sequel vibes.
Yes, the teenagers were very, very Friday the 13th sequel, and that they played into certain stereotypes and, archetype teen characters. For instance, there's this one kid, Byron, who's Tammy's gay friend, and he is playing this young gay black stereotype, I think, to maybe perfection. Like, he's doing it so well, and the character is legitimately pretty funny.
Oh, I laughed a whole bunch. Like, I want to say this about Tammy and the T-Rex very clear when we start talking about this stuff. Tammy and the T-Rex knows it's a comedy. It is trying to be funny, and for the most part, I think it is actually succeeding.
Yeah, it's just a very lowbrow, doofy, and incredibly silly, like low stakes comedy. Like, there is nothing highbrow or like terribly ironic about this. You have to be willing to approach this movie on its level, and it ain't a high level.
It's the best kind of low because it knows how absurd it is. It realizes, like, we're making a movie about a giant robot T-Rex who eventually we're going to put Paul Walker's brain into, and we're going to have a weird King Kong type love story. It is not trying to do a realistic riff on that. This is like 6 steps away from a like Abrams Zucker movie.
Yeah, I was a little bit reminded in moments of Top Secret, but I feel like Top Secret, of course, is, that's kind of like masterpiece level spoof comedy. But yeah, this isn't really directly spoofing anything because it is so singular. I mean, obviously with the sort of archetype teen characters, it could feel like a spoof of certain things, but ultimately, like, this movie very brazenly does its own thing. And there's a certain point in the movie where you feel like structurally we're totally off the rails because this isn't following any kind of familiar template. You might expect by that 15-minute point, Paul Walker is not going to get a whole lot of development. He's going to wind up dead. They're going to take the brain out of him, and he'll be a dinosaur from that point in the movie, and it'll be a pretty small role. Actually, Walker's role is pretty significant, and they hold off putting his brain in that dinosaur for a bit because they have to do a lot of, wacky humor with him before he dies or before his brain is transferred. But it's so doing its own thing and really marching to the beat of its own drum and other sorts of, other hackneyed metaphors. But damn if I didn't appreciate that. Certainly not every joke is going to land. There are plenty of jokes in this movie that are like throwaway, like, I'm just going to say something silly.
But I'll say this, the script, there is a conscious effort here towards humor and good humor. There are like one of the moments that I liked that really illuminated that to me is that when Terry Kaiser's mad scientist, Dr. Wachenstein, comes and does this whole con at the hospital to get a hold of Paul Walker's body, they fake that he has died by his assistant Helga, played by Ellen Dubin, who is just in this absolute comic book just show off costume.
Her costumes throughout the movie are insane. They're so fun.
There's so many good costumes. The escalation of Byron's costumes I could write an essay on it. But so he comes to the hospital and they fake that he is dead. And while Denise Richards is, crying over her lost love that she believes, Terry Kaiser leans in and is like, don't worry, he's going to a better place. Helga, take him to the morgue. Like, that's
yeah.
Like,
oh no, there's a bunch of like good snappy jokes where it's like an instant subversion, expectation subversion. They do that a lot through some really good jump cuts. There's one jump cut in this movie, like back to a really gory visual gag that had me rolling with laughter. It was so funny. But this whole sequence where they're trying to get, Paul Walker, who evidently is actually pretty okay. Evidently, it was a really mild mauling. Who'd have thought? Because he wakes up shortly after they try to wheel him out of the hospital, and Helga has to deck him with a series of right crosses.
Well, isn't it? No, the rule of three gag there is that she injects him with something to knock him out, and then he's all like loopy. She injects him again, and he's like, wait a minute, what's going on? And then the third time, she just punches him across the face.
Yeah, she just throws a right cross and boom, knocks him out. And then they do it again later.
It's like, say what you will, but there is a clear like realization of comedy structure on, it's within this absurd movie. And the movie is absurd tonally. The premise is absurd. And I think so much of that absurdity is difficult to take at face value for a lot of people.
Right. There's a lot of stuff here that's just sort of like frivolously silly and what I would call joke adjacent, but it's never annoying or really bad. There are a lot of like actual good jokes, though. They're just very lowbrow. It's not like a whole bunch of toilet humor. There's certainly toilet humor in the film.
There's stuff I admit to when eventually they get Paul Walker back and he wakes up in the middle of the operation and they have to take him out, and then they just saw open his fucking skull
with a jigsaw, and it's like really quite gory too. I mean, in a silly way, but there's a lot of blood spraying everywhere.
The gore in this movie, it has earned its reputation. The gore is always over the top to a point where it is acknowledging how over the top it is. You're talking about that cut that you loved, and it is a little bit later in which a character has their head smushed by the T-Rex, and we come back and we see Helga in close-up going like, oh, what's his? I can't remember the character's name. I think it's Bobby or something.
Something like that.
And she's just like, Bobby? And then cut to this like garbage pail kid drawing of a smushed head face.
Right. A deflated man with his face smashed fully in, like flat as a pancake, like a Beetlejuice gag, like the flat guy flying through the office walls.
It's more extreme than that. Like it's really, and we kept saying like Looney Tunes, and at one point somebody refers to somebody being crazy as a Looney Tune, and then we saw Acme on the side of a truck. I'm like, they knew it. Like, this is not an accident. They are going for this.
No, it's very aware of what it's doing. It's not in any way trying to be exceptional. Like it's not trying super, super hard. I one of the things I really like about it is that there was sort of a sense of ease about all of it. Like, it wasn't trying to impress. It's just doing well.
There's an element of that to the filmmaking, because this was all filmed down the road from where Stuart Raffle lived.
Yeah.
Like, because I mean, that's the thing, is this is all in his like Glendale neighborhood. Mm-hmm. Like, so there is a like, oh, cool. And I mean, for low budget filmmaking, it makes a lot of sense, because it's like, well, you lose a lot of time and production going to different locations.
Right.
So by this being, it's like literally it's right down the road, and we could just go drive over there and shoot. And all of the actors and everything, they all live in the area. So they can just, get out of their driveway and drive about 10 minutes to the set.
Right. It's why you see a lot of the same sort of mundane locations reused over and over and over again when things shoot in and around LA. But like when M. Night Shyamalan wants to make a movie within 45 minutes of his home in Philadelphia, that's incredibly expensive, because the same kind of luxuries that you have shooting in California aren't afforded to you in something like Philadelphia. So there is a lot of stuff where it's like, what can we put together that's, I have this dinosaur. What can we put together really, really quickly and easily that will be something marketable in a very, very short period of time? And the answer is Tammy and the Teenage T-Rex. And you'd think it would be an utter piece of crap, but you know what? I feel like this movie, presented in its original form, has a shot of becoming a cult movie. And I think it has. I mean, I think it was really notable that this movie got re-released online, thanks to platforms like Shudder, where it's like, oh, you can see this incredibly gory and silly gonzo comedy for the very first time in the United States. And you know what? It's I think it's worth a watch.
Well, all props to Vinegar Syndrome for, finding this and giving this the love. I mean, I care about this way more than any studio movie getting a release, because these are the movies that have a real chance of becoming lost. This is a very special instance because it was the original cut of the movie that, was taken away and malformed into something else outside of the writer director's purview. And there's just so much in this movie that, like you said about the structure, that it continues. So Paul Walker's brain gets put into this dinosaur, and immediately once he realizes he's a dinosaur, it becomes a revenge movie. And you're like, oh, okay, this is what we're doing.
Right. You're like, I understand the structure. But by 40 minutes into the movie, he has massacred all of the bullies at a backyard party.
The entire revenge plot takes place in one scene, in an entire party where he just kills off all of them.
Yeah.
And so then you're like, so wait, what is this movie? Like, what's happening? And in all honesty, that is exciting. That's thrilling to be like, oh, I thought I knew what a movie was doing. It's done that. What can be next?
Yeah, they kind of change the goalpost every few scenes. Like after the big revenge scene, then it's a matter of like, okay, well they're going to lay Paul Walker's character's body to rest. And so the dinosaur shows up at the funeral and is openly weeping. Like there are big goopy tears streaming down the dinosaur's face. By the way, this in the movie is supposed to be like a cybernetic animatronic robot dinosaur. It's crying for some reason, cartoon reasons, let's be honest. And so
Acme.
Acme. It's hiding like in the bushes, giant T-Rex hiding in the bushes at his own funeral. Incredibly funny scene. Then there's a really good bit of corpse humor where the mad scientists show up and they're trying to get I think they're trying to get the T-Rex back basically. But there's a good bit of corpse humor where they fall into Paul Walker's character's open grave and all that.
Well, the setup of it is that eventually, first of all, that I do want to commend this movie's attempt at sincerity, because while it's all having fun, it's never having fun at its own expense. That's a very important distinction to make here, because it is trying to make the emotional core of this movie work. My biggest criticism with the movie is that I don't think it does. I don't think and it's unfortunate because Denise Richards I'm gonna say something I think is really bold. I think this is the best I've ever seen Denise Richards acting. Is in Tammy and the T-Rex.
She is really giving it her all in this movie, and I'm not joking. She really does attempt to perform this with as much sincerity, I think, as she can muster, and I think that level of sincerity is admirable. Like, she's really approaching this material with an astonishing degree of sincerity, like to the point later on in the movie after they realize, like, they're never going to get his body, or they're never going to get Paul Walker's brain back into another body, like he's stuck as a dinosaur, and she's openly like weeping against this dinosaur who is now her co-star, and she's really going for it, man. Good for her.
I think the movie was incredibly, deeply lucky to get both Paul Walker and Denise Richards, who, you know, I believe were both just models at the time trying to break into acting.
Well, and they were lucky to get everybody else too. I mean,
of course, Terry Kaiser,
Ellen Dubin and Terry Kaiser, the guy who played the kid Isaac in the Children of the Corn movie, he's in this. He's got a little role as one of the mad scientists, Igor's. The guy who plays Pedro in Napoleon Dynamite, he shows up.
Efren Ramirez, yeah,
he's a pizza delivery guy in one short scene. This got a lot of recognizable faces in it, which you might think is kind of surprising when you watch the movie. I certainly felt surprised.
It has energized me to learn more about Stuart Raffel and see more of his movies, because even though this is being an absolute farce, it is a farce.
Oh yeah,
it's at least attempting. I don't think it's successful a lot, but it's at least attempting modicums of sincerity, to the point where you have Byron, who we should say is played by Theo Forsett, who is great in the movie. Like, it is so funny. His costumes continually just get better with every appearance, and he is committing to an extremely stereotypical role. Like,
sure.
It's so much of a stereotype that I almost believe that it is knowingly being taken to the nth degree.
Oh, I mean, there's no question. He certainly knows he's playing a stereotype.
Yes.
As for like how offensive that stereotype is going to like mileage is going to vary on that. But they do actually manage to humanize his character in a really interesting way by making him the son of the sheriff.
That is a moment where it's like, okay, this character is fulfilling this role and doing it well, but it is still a stereotypical role. Then we have seen scenes with the sheriff, you know, being befuddled at what's going on, or, you know, whatever. then there is a confrontation scene between the sheriff and Byron, and it is revealed in a line of dialogue that it's a father and son relationship.
Mm-hmm.
And I said to you, I was like, did that just reveal that it's like, wow, that's a dynamic. I didn't expect like that level of a dynamic to be there. Now, granted, of course, there is that casual, unaware racism of the only two black people in the movie have to be related.
Right. Well, the only two like black speaking roles. there are some black extras.
they must be related, but even so, it is still like, wow, you didn't have to do that. Like in this movie, we wouldn't have even given it a second thought. But by having this contentious relationship between the very straight-laced, clearly, blue collar sheriff and his flamboyantly gay son, it is, and then there's a scene in this which is like, I can't believe is in the movie. And understand, I'm talking about a movie where a dinosaur is ripping people's guts out and stomping on their heads and turning them into cartoon pancakes. The thing I can't believe is in this movie is there is a scene of two officers restraining Byron. And it is very clear that they are aware of what they're doing here.
Yeah.
In regards to talking about race relations with police.
Sure. Yeah. This movie's attempts at sincerity are not misguided, I feel. Obviously I'm no authority in speaking on this. And obviously any movie from 1994 trying to deal with this is not going to age perfectly. And I understand that, but I do appreciate the attempts at actually kind of reckoning with the sort of stereotypical characters. And it's like, what can we do to actually lend some sincerity to this and some actual heartfelt, like not manufactured, but like something real. Like what can we put in here as far as truth? And there's enough of it that I was quite surprised, but the substance of the movie is not that. The substance of the movie is we got an animatronic dinosaur for a couple of weeks. Let's stomp on some heads with it. And it's funny as hell. Like there's this moment early on, I think the first head the dinosaur bites off is the kid from Children of the Corn. So he bites the kid's head off. And then there's a shot where the T-Rex's hand comes up to the mouth and starts picking like blood and guts out of the teeth. It was in that moment where I was like, oh, I love this dinosaur so much.
This dinosaur attempts to make a collect call on a payphone.
Yeah.
When he runs into Byron after slaughtering all of the bullies and the gang at the party, Byron thinks he's going to get killed. And the T-Rex picks him up and then dusts his shoulders off.
Yeah.
This movie is legitimately funny. And I can see a very easy ironic read of like, this is so stupid. It's like, you think they don't know? Like it's interesting that we ended up doing this the week after doing a Sam Raimi movie, because I feel like their ethos is very similar in the sense of like, we know what we're doing.
Yeah. I'm in on the joke here, folks.
Yeah. You can't make like, we wrote this shit. Like we know what we're doing. So it's very hard for me to see any kind of ironic appreciation for this, because I'm like, it's right there and it's being extremely sincere to a fault, I will say.
It's difficult to accuse, if you want to put this movie in that light, it's difficult to accuse this movie of being silly and stupid, because the movie fucking knows it's being silly and stupid. That's kind of the point. It's like, well, let's make a really silly, wacky, stupid movie on a tiny budget in a short period of time. And, I've seen plenty of bad movies get made with that kind of ethos, but something happened here that was a little bit alchemical. There's a little bit of magic that happened on this that is really fun. There's this scene where they take the dinosaur to the morgue so they can pick a new body for Paul Walker's brain. And you and I were like, holy shit, this actually reminds me of that scene in the Dr. Manhattan episode of Watchmen, the HBO Watchmen show, where Dr. Manhattan picks a body to inhabit and like a model to look like. And it's like, oh, that's why he looks like, Yahya Abdul Mateen II. Spoilers.
Yes, we are the only people out here who are saying HBO's Watchmen owes a debt to Tammy and the T-Rex.
Absolutely it does.
And this scene is very funny. Now, granted, I'm gonna put this out there. Corpse humor is like an easy laugh thing for me. It's just a thing that I find really funny most of the time.
Well, and they got one of the best guys in the game, Terry Kaiser.
That's true. Yeah,
Bernie himself.
And in this sequence where Byron and Tammy are pulling out different corpses and running them up to a window because the T-Rex is out on like a truck outside, it is, and they're showing him and they're like, this one, he's like, nah.
Yeah, he's giving a thumbs up and thumbs down. Yeah. It's very funny. And the T-Rex, by the way, is in the bed of like a landscaping truck, like to haul tree debris away. And so the T-Rex's head is just sort of sticking up over the side and, shaking its head.
The part of the reason they have to film it that way is because when we first see it in the warehouse before it's got Paul Walker's brain in it, it is on this rolling sled.
Right.
That's just part of whatever that thing was. So if you watch the movie, whenever they have the full T-Rex, they can't show its feet. Like they have to cut to different inserts to do any like foot stomps and stuff. So there's always, stuff covering the base or hiding the dinosaur behind stuff so we don't see that it's on this sled. I love that.
Exactly. There's one shot where it's standing on a couple of bales of hay to hide the platform.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then in wide shots, they just had a model dinosaur that they did stop motion and they composited in. The compositing looks awful, but I don't give a shit.
It's charming.
It's incredibly charming. There's a shot where Denise Richards' character is riding away on the back of the on the back of the dinosaur into the sunset, which is in the third act of the movie. And I was like, God damn it, I am so charmed.
Well, and I mean, then the movie continues to surprise me in that the officers end up gunning down the giant robot T-Rex and killing him again.
Insane. I could not believe this. You're like, are they going to turn him into John Marston from Red Dead Redemption?
Sure enough. They're going to John Marston him. And it's like, it's exactly what happens. And so they murder him in cold blood as they blow him to bits. And then we fade and come back up, and Denise Richards, Tammy, is all happy with her parents, like, hi, Mom and Dad. And they're like, yeah, she shouldn't be this happy considering what happened.
Yeah. Surprisingly chipper after seeing her dinosaur boyfriend shot to death in front of her. Turns out she's rescued his brain and put it in a dish full of fluid with all these wires sticking out of it, hooked it up to a video camera so he can see her. And then she proceeds to do a minutes long strip tease, right? And it's like, why is this going on so long? What the fuck is going on? She pours a glass of booze over the brain to get it drunk and then dances until sparks explodes out of the brain.
And that's the end of the movie.
Yeah, roll credits, bitch. Crazy.
A brain came. Like, this is the thing. Tammy and the T-Rex is equal parts to me deranged and so charming. Like it's probably the most charming movie that we've done so far this year.
It's got charm for days, and you definitely enjoyed it more than I did. One of the observations that I had is like, oh, this is a good weed movie. Like if you want to get stoned and watch a silly movie, like this is a great option. And then you confessed to something. I don't know if you want to confess to.
Good Lord. I mean, what else could it be now that you said it's like, yes, it's true. I was eating goldfish while I was watching this movie. Yes. Like here's the thing is that this is a perfect example of what people talk about, I feel, when they talk about a, quote, so bad it's good movie. I despise that terminology, but the sentiment behind it, I think this is what we're kind of talking about when we talk about that, in the sense that people seem to recognize a failing or an amateur nature in a production, but there are other elements about it that are so baffling or bizarre or humorous that it transcends those faults. And Tammy and the T-Rex, I'll say this, I'm deeply interested in Stuart Raffles' filmography, but obviously the low budget nature of this and the very slapdash nature of it, it's a very amateur looking movie.
Yeah. There are some scenes that really border on amateurish, but there are other areas in the production, and you can tell like, oh, well, somebody was paying attention. Like this movie's got it where it counts. It's
totally functional as a piece of filmmaking. I don't have a problem with it, but again, it's like that's going to come off as cheap to a lot of people whose main intake are only mainstream big budget productions.
Right. It would be one thing if it were just the outlandish premise, but the way that premise is used to actually build different scenarios is, I think, quite well done here. And it sounds like we're going academic on Tammy and the T-Rex, but really, I think if you're feeling silly, if you're feeling wacky, and you want to watch a goofy movie that's going to make you giggle, this is exactly what this movie is designed to do. It is not attempting to engage with you in any sort of highbrow manner at all. Just have fun.
Well, we should close things out here, as this is the final entry in March Madness, our entire month devoted to mad scientist movies. Thankfully, I was so pleased in this movie when a character referred to Terry Kaiser's Dr. Walkenstein as a mad scientist, just said it right up. And I was like, oh, this is the perfect note to go out on. Terry Kaiser is definitely the most mad of our mad scientists that we had this month.
Oh, like Rocky Horror level mad scientist too.
Yes. We couldn't have picked a better one to go out on, I feel, in terms of like escalation, because this is the nutball cartoon mad scientist. He basically has the "they called me crazy, well, I'll show them" moment when we are introduced to him.
He has 3 henches.
He has henches. Like, it is all vibing on that particular, you expect Rocky and Bullwinkle to come in at some point. Like, it's that cartoon level.
Oh yeah. He's got the romantic hench, the Helga woman. Their romantic relationship is very funny. Like the way that they flirt and kiss and stuff like that. It's like, oh, this is so weird.
Oh my God. When they get tied up and the line I think is he's all bound up and he's like, "Helga, chew my rope."
Like, yeah. It's again, very stupid, lowbrow oral sex joke, but it's funny.
And then
it's
she's
fucking
like,
funny.
"Oh, doctor." I'm like, this is fucking great. Like,
yeah. And then there's a big strong man hench.
He's the one that gets pancaked.
Yeah, he looks like an Arnold Schwarzenegger body double.
Yeah.
And then there's the Children of the Corn guy who gets his head ripped off, delightfully so. I mean, there's some great just gory deaths in this movie. The Aaron Burr commercial guy, Sean Whalen, gets his guts kicked out by the Tyrannosaur. The lead bully, I think, gets his head ripped off, and then the head is thrown down to the ground where it explodes, and a big bloody splat. Like, come on. I can't imagine what this movie would have been in PG-13 form with all the gore cut, because there's just so much of it.
I mean, we didn't even talk about when they're operating on Paul Walker and pulling out his entire brain, and then Terry Kaiser starts playing with one of the nerve endings, which makes his dick become a boner, and then his dick is like flying around, and he's like controlling his. It's like the penis in Swiss Army Man, like
that or Zoolander. Yeah, it's a fun time, and like you said, I'm really glad that we did this at the end of Mad Scientist Week, because it has the most fun mad scientists in the story. This isn't a tragic mad scientist like we saw in Darkman. It's not the sort of mundane, benevolent mad scientist like we saw in Honey, I Shrunk the Kids. This is full tilt cartoon wacky mad scientist, just leaning into that role as much as it can.
Well, what's interesting is that he certainly positioned as an antagonist, but unlike Sean Connery's mad scientist in the Avengers, Terry Kaiser is not the bad guy in the end. He is actually the one, like, when they're like, oh yeah, he reveals like, well, look, the cybernetic T-Rex was just a stepping point. Like, what I'm dealing with is trying to transfer human consciousness into a digital form and all this kind of stuff. And he's clearly the one who ends up preserving Paul Walker's brain so that it can get drunk and explode when Denise Richards does a striptease.
That happens.
So, like, in the end, the evil mad scientist actually ends up kind of having a weird redemptive arc, and it's Terry Kaiser's having so much fun in this movie.
Oh yeah, he's clearly having a blast. And that's the vibe I get from a lot of this movie. It's just it seemed like people were having fun, and I'm having fun.
Exactly. So I mean, closing out, I really don't think we could have picked a better movie to close out Mad Scientist Month. It's been an eclectic month. It's been a weird one, but like,
thankfully,
yeah, I've liked that weirdness. So we hope you've enjoyed March Madness with us as well. But now we have to head over to the shelf, where we pick a movie that might act as a good pairing or substitute for our main topic. And we want to encourage you, loyal listener, to go to GenreVision.com, comment on the post for this episode with your own shelf pick for Tammy and the T-Rex, and we will feature it on next week's episode. Travis, what are you going to pull off the shelf for Tammy and the T-Rex?
George Romero's Monkey Shines. This movie has a bit of a reputation for being silly and strange, and it is all of those things. It is it's almost a mad scientist story. It's more of an irresponsible scientist story, more akin to something like Jurassic Park or Deep Blue Sea, where it's like, okay, can we make an animal super smart? And is that the right thing to do? But what I like about Monkey Shines and the way I think it correlates to Tammy and the T-Rex is that it seems to be in a similar intersection of silliness, sincerity, and commitment. Its commitment to everything it's doing is really, really admirable. It's also silly and knowingly so. And it's also incredibly sincere. There are some things in Monkey Shines, which is a movie about a man who is hit by a car while running and becomes I believe he becomes a quadriplegic. He no longer has use of his arms or legs, and so he winds up in a wheelchair. He's played by Jason Baggy, and they hire a helper monkey for him, a capuchin monkey who's been injected with super smart monkey serum, and eventually they develop a psychic bond, and she starts murdering people for him. It's an utterly totally nutty premise, and I believe it's based on a novel as well.
It is,
but
yeah.
The way it commits to the sincerity of all it is awesome. And it's a Romero movie, so it's pretty well directed.
Doesn't the monkey murder Stanley Tucci?
No, I don't believe the monkey murders Stanley Tucci, who plays a surgeon in the movie.
Doesn't it set fire?
There is some kind of fire setting thing that the monkey does.
Well, if you want clarification on this, go listen to our Monkey Shines episode.
Yeah, it's a good movie. It is knowingly silly. You will probably laugh at a few things. Jason Baggy gets crazy monkey face at one point. Where he is slowly getting evil because his mind is merging with the crazy monkey. And so he gets crazy teeth and, big shadows under his eyes and stuff like that. It's pretty fucking great. It also has one of my all-time favorite sex scenes that we've ever done for a GenreVision movie. So I'll give it that. Anyway, Drew, what are you pulling off the shelf for Tammy and the T-Rex?
Gremlins 2. Look, this is the only movie that I feel complements the levels of utter absurdity that are going on in Tammy and the T-Rex. Now, here's the thing. Gremlins 2 is very, very committed to what it's doing, but it is like a movie about anti-sincerity, about the thing as a sequel. It is poking fun at itself.
Right. Turning into some giant corporate product, merch. I mean,
to the point that there's a moment where a gremlin is getting the Warner Brothers logo tattooed on its chest. Yes. This movie is just stabbing at everything at its own existence, but it's doing it with an incredible amount of commitment to that bit.
It actually has an opening with Looney Tunes characters.
I mean, yeah, this movie opened with a Looney Tunes cartoon between Bugs Bunny and Daffy Duck. It can't be any clearer what its intentions are. And over the years, Gremlins 2 seems to have almost, in some ways, eclipsed the original. And I totally understand why. And I almost the first Gremlins will always have that special place in my heart, but Gremlins 2, the new batch, is a monumental achievement in mainstream movie making to me. Something that I don't think can ever be done again.
Yeah. I mean, it is the kind of crazy, insane premise for a movie that I don't think we'll ever see again.
Except when we see stuff like Tammy and the T-Rex.
Right. But I think obviously the word meta gets overused, but the meta awareness of that script and just knowing exactly what it was doing and so confidently knowing what it was creating, that I think is unmatched about Gremlins 2. It's awareness of what it is as a corporate product, but also being just sort of an excuse to go crazy with effects and make all these silly gags. There's this running gag in the movie about a Canadian restaurant, and it's clearly somebody just wanted to make a silly gag about a Canadian restaurant because it has nothing to do with what Gremlins is at its core as a premise. It's just somebody wanted to do something really silly and stupid. I admire that about Gremlins 2 so much.
Oh man, I could just sit here and quote all that. Are you okay? Do you want another Molson?
Love it.
So great. Yeah, Gremlins 2, much like Tammy and the T-Rex, if you want a movie to put a big stupid grin on your face, watch Gremlins 2. Well, let's head over to the listener shelf picks for last week's episode on Darkman. Eric Fuchs had, continuing our Godzilla talk, Terror of Mechagodzilla, which he says might be his favorite one. But for Darkman, he went with Phantom of the Paradise. Phenomenal shelf pick.
Yeah, great movie. Love that movie.
Steven Nesbella had another Sam Raimi movie, The Quick and the Dead, which, hell yeah, really like Quick and the Dead. Very fun. JT went with Total Recall, the Paul Verhoeven one, and Dr. Giggles, because Larry Drake. And Dr. Giggles is quite fun. I enjoyed it. And then Mr. Milksteak had Dick Tracy, a movie I know Travis has a particular spot in his heart for, I feel.
I don't have like a huge amount of affinity for that movie because it's so weird and it's such a weird pay-on to like Warren Beatty's narcissistic soul. But it's fascinating, totally fascinating movie.
And the other one that Mr. Milksteak went with is Dead and Buried, a movie I wish we could have saved for this show. Maybe we'll feature it sometime because it was a movie I continually was like, Travis, I think you'd like this Dead and Buried movie.
Yeah, and then I finally watched it last year and really liked it.
Yeah, it's good shit. That I think is still available on Shudder. If you've never seen Dead and Buried, see Dead and Buried. Very good, very weird little horror movie from the 80s. Now, we do have to do some calls to action, but please stick around because we will be doing Currently Consuming later, where Travis will be talking about Monster Hunter, the video game adaptation from Paul W.S. Anderson starring Mia Jovovich, and I will be talking about one of the only movies directed by Freddy Krueger. So we did our usual Patreon pre-show this week, kind of a more serious toned pre-show than we normally do.
Well, last year, a couple times we did sort of like, COVID era check-ins, or we were just talking about like what was happening in this whole, COVID craziness and sort of diarizing a little bit of like what stage we were at with all this. And we finally did another one of those today. The big thing was like I just received my first dose of the vaccine, so that was significant, and that's what we talked about. It's something we do every week now at GenreVision, is to do a weekly pre-show, and it's about any subject we want. It could be as frivolous as talking about foods we like to eat or video games we're playing. Last week's was all about Mario. But if you want to get a weekly pre-show, all you have to do is go to patreon.com/GenreVision. Sign up to be a premium subscriber. It's $5 a month, and it gives you access to all of our pre-shows, but also all of our other bonus content, which includes monthly episodes of Currently Consuming and additional content from our FinFlix podcast and our podcast Third Time's the Charm.
So if that sounds appealing to you, please go to patreon.com/GenreVision and become a premium subscriber for just $5 a month. And if you really love what we're doing here on GenreVision, we urge you to go to the Apple Podcast Store and rate and review GenreVision. We actually recently went up in the rankings, and cracked the top 100 for film review podcasts in the USA. That's something that we would love to see happen again and happen in an even more prominent way. And a big way to help that happen is to leave reviews for the show. It's a real quick and easy thing, and it helps out, honestly, more than you probably know. And if you do submit a written review, we promise to feature it here on the show. Let's do some Currently Consuming.
Nom, 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 nom.
Travis, what's been on your plate?
I wanted to talk about the new Monster Hunter movie from, as we said, Paul W.S. Anderson, director of such movies as Mortal Kombat, the adaptation from the 90s, Event Horizon, which is a great movie, Resident Evil, Alien vs. Predator. So he's got a bit of a reputation as like the video game adaptation guy. I should preface this by saying I've never played a Monster Hunter game. I understand that there is a big following for this franchise, and I know that in this adaptation it was very closely observed by parent company Capcom to make sure that this was something that was true to the Monster Hunter property. They wanted it adapted in a very specific way. Paul W.S. Anderson is also the sole credited writer for this movie. And so he worked heavily with Capcom to make sure that this was a movie that they would like. And I've seen some praise for this, from people who like the Monster Hunter games. And I think I can understand why. Like it captures the aesthetic of the games pretty well. All the weapons are sort of big and chunky and crazy looking, and the costumes are sort of similar. And Ron Perlman gets to be some guy in a crazy wig and wield a giant flaming axe and, kill dragons with it and shit. And if you like that kind of stuff, then maybe you'll dig Monster Hunter. But to me, this was just like another pretty lackluster Paul W.S. Anderson movie. Like, I love Event Horizon. I just ordered the Scream Factory Blu-ray that's coming out. I love that movie. And I think Paul W.S. Anderson was a guy with tremendous promise as a director. I think he has a little bit of a tendency towards some hyperkinetic stuff that I don't like, but I think he's gotten way less interesting as a visualist in his later years. Like, I think his movies feel overcut and constructed of like too many images that don't feel contiguous or that don't really add up to a sense of like, good eyeline match or anything like that. It's just it's kind of a mess, and at least the movie has the decency of like being fairly short. So it wasn't my thing, but I didn't hate it. I certainly didn't hate it. I gladly paid for it on Apple Movie or the Apple TV rental and watched it in 4K and HDR, and it was like, okay, I paid the $7 and I have my right to say, it's, if it sounds like that's up your alley, then you knock yourself out.
Bouquet. Well, on my end, I watched for the first time. Well, I shouldn't technically say the first time. 976 Evil. This is one of two movies that were directed by Robert Englund, most famous for playing Freddy Krueger. This is a New Line movie. One of the co-writers is Brian Helgeland on this.
Wow.
And stars Stephen Jeffries, who most people will know as Evil Ed from Fright Night. Also has Sandy Dennis, who a lot of people might know from Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf. Is that what she was in? I might be mixing that up with Whatever Happened to Baby Jane. No, it is Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf. And the premise is this wonderfully dated idea because people don't know there used to be things 976 and 900. It got replaced by the 900 area code, but they were these, pay call-in phone lines, a lot of them for sex lines and stuff, but weird stuff. Like the history of this is so fascinating. This phenomena of like, there were phone lines that you could call into Santa and, like phone lines for weird stuff. And the premise of this is that there is 976 Evil, which if you call in, it gives you your horror scope. And of course it is actually telling you something that is predictive, that is like, ooh, because the character that we get introduced to it through is this guy who's in debt and is going to have to give his motorcycle to this gang buddy of his after losing a poker game. And he calls up and the phone says something. It's always in rhyme too. Talking about like, the prize you need is very close by. And so he decides to go next door and steal money from his aunt, and his cousin, who's Stephen Jeffries, whose character's name, I swear to God, is Hoax.
Okay.
Looks up to him and is this nerdy, I think he was like 23, 24 at the time, but is trying to play like a nerdy high schooler. And eventually runs afoul of the 976 Evil phone number and is calling it and is getting addicted to the power it gives him and how he can use it to control other people and enact vengeance on them and all this kind of stuff. This movie is wild and silly. One of the opening scenes has a miraculous moment of fish raining down from the sky.
Magnolia much?
Magnolia is a debt to 976 Evil. And it is miraculous. Like it is a sign from God. This is also suffers from the Avengers syndrome, in which they clearly did not have the money or want to pay the money for extras.
So the movie ends up being smaller than it wants to?
No, it wants to be small. It's a very small story.
Okay.
But it just means that every time that there's a one set backlot thing that they're using of a alleyway where there's a diner on one side of the street and a motorcycle repair shop on the other. And of course, this is very cutesy. The diner is called Dante's and the motorcycle shop is called Virgil's.
Cute. Yeah. Literary allusions here.
The movie theater, which some of the movie takes place at, because the gang of assholes that, pick on and bully Stephen Jeffries, I guess one of them runs the projection booth at this theater called the El Diablo, which has a giant neon pitchfork on the marquee, which guess what? Gets used for a murder. Awesome.
Okay. I like that.
Yeah. It's fun stuff. I caught the end of this movie when I was a kid, and there was one image from it that always stuck with me, which is this overhead shot where the camera slowly, I can't think of what the specific term move for this, so pardon me for saying it wrong.
Say moves.
Yes. It is a dolly type move, but is a bird's eye, looking down. And it has one character getting murdered in a toilet stall and moves over. And as you're hearing it screaming, it ends up at the last toilet stall, and that toilet, for whatever reason, has a giant, bunch of blood coming up in it. And it's just a nightmarish image that stuck with me forever as a kid.
Huh. I'll have to watch this. This sounds fun.
This is it's minor, but then Robert Picardo shows up.
Ooh, love me a good Bob Picardo. Speaking of Gremlins 2.
And yeah, he ends up being the one who was running the 976 Evil. His character's name, Mark Dark. He's not in the movie a lot, but it's Robert Picardo. A dab will do ya.
Yeah, very true.
He's so good. It's very minor. There's a horrible there's two characters that don't need to be in the movie at all that take up stupid plot time, and clearly a lot of their scenes were excised, where it's like an investigative reporter and he starts a romance with the school principal, and it's like, don't care. But it's wild. It's a wild little movie. Robert Englund's not like an amazing director, but it looks like he probably is somebody who likes having fun, because 976 Evil was pretty fun. I got to give it. It's not a total gem, but it's worth a look. I'm glad I finally got around to fulfilling the rest of that nightmarish image that I carried around for decades. So yeah, 976 Evil. Not too shabby.
Sounds like fun to me.
Well, let's wrap things up with our
comment of the week.
And you guys make my heart so full every week. Seeing these comments and seeing the discussions, we keep saying this every week, but y'all keep doing it every week. So I feel like I have to, because it's really just filling my heart with so much warmth, seeing these discussions going on, that you all make it difficult to pick a comment of the week. I do have to say, because this is just where we end up going, is there was a thread started primarily between Mr. Milksteak, JT, and Stephen Nesbella. And Mr. Milksteak and Stephen Nesbella are still rolling with it as of 2 hours ago, it looks like, in which they are creating pun movie titles with Billy Zane's name in them, such as Snakes on a Zane, Avengers End Zane, the Boondock Zanes and my goodness, just put a big smile on my face. And I cannot believe our comment section has blossomed very quickly.
Yeah, I mean, it's been like this, an overnight a forest grew kind of thing.
It really
pretty
is
fun. They did ask in their comments like what peak Billy Zane was, and I'm surprised that nobody said this, or at least I didn't see anybody say this. It's Demon Knight. Thank you.
Yeah,
that is peak Billy Zane. Have that. Chew on that, please.
Oh man, I just want to watch Demon Knight.
Who doesn't? The movie's fucking great.
Sick of this cowboy shit. It's so awesome. This house is condemned. Yeah, watch Demon Knight. It's one of the best fucking movies of the 90s. And I don't mean horror movies. I mean one of the best movies of the 90s.
Yeah. One of the best Drew Deitch movies in the 90s. Sure.
Yeah, well, that's the only eyeballs
it's the only
I
kind
get
of movies in the 90s you got. So.
The only eyeballs I get to look through are mine. So it's for me, it is one of the best movies of the 90s. Well, we hope you enjoyed March Madness month. And next month, our theme is going to be Fighting Fools. We're doing a whole month of basically like showdown fight movies. And of course, we got to kick it off with Godzilla vs. Kong. We got a versus movie right out front. But go to GenreVision.com. You can click schedule up at the top. And you can see just what we've got in store for Fighting Fools month. We hope you'll be back next week to check that out with us. As always, we want to thank you so much for listening. I'm Drew Deitch.
I'm Travis Newton.
And we will see you next week
right here on GenreVision.